Welcome today, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, to Room for Discussion. My name is Alwin, and this is my colleague Donald Kreiken, and we are here today to discuss the basic income. Tomorrow, we will all be having a free income without any questions asked, and we will not have to worry about our basic needs anymore. But this raises some important questions. How will we pay for a basic income? Will we still keep our incentive to work? To answer these questions, we have invited two experts on this subject, Professor Paul de Beer and Professor Guy Standing. Professor Paul de Beer is the co-director of the Amsterdam Institute of Labor Studies, and he is the director of the Scientific Organization of Labor Movements here in Amsterdam. Professor Standing is a development studies professor at the University of London, and he is and before that he was working at the International Labour Organization. At the International Labour Organization, he, amongst many other things, created the famous Decent Work Index. Apart from working at the University of London, Professor Standing is also the co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network, which is a group that advocates the use of a basic income throughout the world. Well, if you would like to join the discussion, please do so via Twitter using #RFD, or if you want to ask a question to one of our speakers, please walk up to Danique. She will attend me that there is a question, and I will give my microphone so you can ask the question. Please hold it to one question only. Well, for now, without any further ado, I would like to ask the audience to give a warm welcome to Professor Guy Standing and Professor Paul de Beer.
Mr. Paul de Beer, Mr. Standing, welcome on my behalf as well. First, Mr. Guy Standing, let's ask you first of all, shortly, what is a basic income?
Thank you very much for inviting me today. I've just come from India, where we've been providing thousands of villagers, each man, each woman, each child, with a monthly basic income. And we've been monitoring and evaluating the effects over 2 years. I can tell you, if you go to those villages, you will cry like I do.
What is it you give these people?
We provide them with what amounts to 1/3 of their subsistence in cash, unconditionally, without any demands on them or any expectations. And what we did is we provided them, we did a baseline census, we looked at their economic conditions, their nutrition, their health, their schooling, and so on. And then after 6 months of receiving the basic income, we compared what had happened in those villages with other similar villages where nobody received a basic income. And then after another 6 months, we went back and we compared again. And then after another 6 months, we did the same. So what we've actually got is an experiment where thousands of people have been receiving a basic income. Now your question, I'll come to it. But we've actually got applied information that can tell us what happens. A basic income, and I think Paul and I would agree on the definition, let us hope so. A basic income is, first of all, you must define the terms. Basic, that means it must be a meaningful amount given to any individual, but not full. In other words, it's not a full income where you would have absolutely no incentive to go and earn other income. So it's a basic, but it must be meaningful, meeting a sufficiently large proportion of your total needs, right? The second thing is very important, that it must be paid in cash, not in some voucher form or other form that the state can manipulate. The third critical feature is that it should be individual and equal. So each man, each woman should have the same amount, and you could have it with a smaller amount for each child.
Mr. De Beer. We already, to my knowledge, in the Netherlands, for people unemployed, have benefits up to more than 1,000 euros a month. Is this any different?
Yeah, it certainly is different. Of course, it's one of the arguments against the idea of a basic income. People say we already have a basic income. We have a generous system of social protection, and thus everyone in the Netherlands is guaranteed a kind of income in order to at a subsistence level.
But so we already have a guaranteed income in this country?
Well, not in the sense as Guy has just explained, a basic income, because it's conditional. You only get it if you are unemployed, for example, if you're not able to get some other kind of income support, for example, for your partner. It's not always individual. If you're in social assistance, it's dependent on whether you have a partner, whether you have some wealth that you can rely on. But I think this is a crucial question about how you define a basic income. Guy just said it should be a substantial amount, but it should still be so low that people get sufficient incentives to earn some extra living. And this has always been a discussion, I think, about among the advocates of basic income. Should it be at a subsistence level or should it be below the subsistence level? And if it's below the subsistence level, it simply means that people will always need some extra source of income in order to survive.
But what then happens to people who can't work anymore?
Well, that's the problem. So I think if you do not look at the basic income from the perspective of a developing country, but from a developed country like the Netherlands, then I think the problem is, if it's below subsistence level, then we still think that some people who are not able to work or to get some other source of income should get the additional benefit, for example, a social assistance benefit. If it is at a subsistence level, then of course it can be used to abolish a large part of our social protection system, but then of course it becomes very expensive, and there's the question, will people still be willing to work if they already get an income at a subsistence level?
We come to this later on. If I heard you correctly, Mr. Standing, you meant equal. This means for all. Why give a basic income to a millionaire?
Well, I think you've got to go back to the political economy. I know this is not what you want me to do, but this is what I want to do. Because I think you cannot divorce the debate on a basic income from what is actually happening in the global transformation. And what we're seeing is that millions and millions of people are entering the precariat.
What is that?
The precariat consists of people who are facing multiple forms of insecurity. They are experiencing insecure labor but unstable living as well, and are not getting access to a wide range of benefits that most of you in this room might presume is your norm as a citizen.
What kind of benefits would you...
They don't get access to occupational pensions. They don't get access to paid holidays. They don't have entitlement to many social rights because they haven't got a contributions record. And as a consequence, most people in the precariat are plunged into what we call poverty traps. Okay? If they become unemployed, or they have an accident, or they have a mishap, or whatever it might be, they're suddenly dependent on means-tested social assistance. Now, what has happened with the growth of means-tested social assistance is all the old presumptions of a welfare state have faded away, and increasingly the state has turned to behavior testing. All right? You have to prove you're a deserving poor in order for you to get benefits. And that means that people who are faced with a poverty trap mean going from a meager benefit into a low-paying job with volatile wages. They're facing a marginal tax rate of 80%, 90%, sometimes over 100%. Now, you have to have a solution to that, otherwise you've got no incentives.
So then I come back to my question, because you mean you have to deserve it. Otherwise said, you have to show whether you need it. So why does a millionaire need basic income?
The way to deal with your problem, with your millionaires, is to have a proper taxation system, so you can claw it back. It's much easier administratively, and you have much, I gather many of your economists, you have much lower type 1 errors if you have a universal system of providing persons with a basic income, and you can justify it from an ethical point of view, which I hope we will discuss later, than trying to decide who is deserving and who is not, and then doing all these assessment tests which build up bills and results in high type 1 errors. In other words, excluding people that you would actually wish to include.
But right now we have a very complex system to actually a complex question. We try to target the people who actually need help. And when you use a simple basic income system where you don't need the complex system, it's not as effective. We need a complex system now because we need to answer the question of which people are needing.
The problem with that presumption is that, as far as I'm aware, maybe the Netherlands is unique in this respect, but I don't think so. Means testing always has huge moral hazards, immoral hazards, and low take-up. In other words, however complex your system of determining whether you are in need, the system fails. Huge numbers of people who are in need get excluded.
Do you agree, Mr. De Beer?
Well, I still would like you to ask you the question, if you think the basic income should be below subsistence level, then you still need a system of social assistance to provide people who are not able to get any other source of income to get to the subsistence level. So you still need targeting and conditionality, etc., and means testing.
No, I think that's why I went back and started, but I know we're in a sort of debate mode, so I can't develop a long argument on this. But really, what we're in is a situation of chronic inequality, where the economic system that is taking shape around the world is redistributing income from workers and citizens to a tiny, tiny minority who are earning rental income. And we should be approaching this debate not with this, need, deserving, this and that, but a new system of distribution.
But Mr. Standing, a small income to a almost capitalist bourgeoisie and a lower working class almost sounds like Marxism to me.
No, that's nonsense.
Is this Marxism?
No, that's nonsense. I mean, it's not anything to do with communism or anything to do with Leninism or something like that. This is the opposite, in fact. It's an emancipatory agenda that doesn't involve the state telling people what to do and so on. It is talking about redistributing income in an ethically good way and providing the capacity to make choices about how you live. One of the worst features, if not the worst feature, of the laborist social insurance and social assistance system built up in the 20th century is that it made a distinction between labor and work. And only if you did certain types of labor or were prepared to do those types of labor would you be given generously by the state. So all the work that women do disappears from the social protection system. And a basic income would actually enable people to do the sort of work that women traditionally have had to do without getting paid for it, and would make a more even playing field in encouraging a more free approach to work and labor.
Mr. De Beer, we also have the other side of the story. Why do we give basic income to a couch potato? We need to incentivize these people to go to work, don't we?
Well, of course, that's also an ethical question whether you think you should give them the incentive. But of course, I agree with the fact that if too many people would stay at home and indeed lay on the couch, this might put the system in danger. But of course, Guy Standing, I think, rightly has stressed the fact that a basic income might help in removing a lot of disincentives, for example, the poverty trap. If you keep your basic income, if you start working, it means that every euro that you earn, at least you can keep part of it. Of course, you have to pay taxes on it, but you will never be forced to hand in all your earned income to, for example, the Social Security office.
But
so in that respect, it gives people more incentives. But of course, you're correct. Again, if it would be at subsistence level, then people would have the opportunity to stay at home and do nothing at all. The question, of course, is, will there be many people who think that their life will be most fulfilling if they stay all the time on the couch watching television. I don't think many people see this as an ideal type of life that they really would like to have until they die.
But will these people then instead go to hard work, hard labor, and work their butt off for the others?
Well, okay, I think that this is one of the most interesting questions. To what extent will introduction of a basic income change the functioning of labor markets, especially the lower part of the labor market? It certainly is true, I think, that people with low skills who are disadvantaged, who find it difficult to find a job, might get a stronger position because they get a real alternative. Nowadays, part of these people, the only thing they can do is simply accept every lousy job they can get. And indeed from the field...
But is that wrong?
Well, it might be wrong because it simply means that people are exploited, actually. Since they only can get a benefit if they are willing to work, so actually you can force them to do any work you would like them to do. But I think a basic income might offer them the opportunity to have a real choice. Whether they think it's
Mr. Stanley, why don't we improve the current system? Why don't we increase minimum wages?
Well, let me answer this. Your first point first. A basic income. Listen to what I'm. Sorry. A basic income, contrary to what your line of questioning is suggesting, a basic income would increase. Listen to me. Increase the incentive to labour, and that is because at the current means-tested systems and behaviour-tested systems, what you're doing is you're telling a poor person that if you go from benefits to a low-wage job, you will be effectively taxed at 90% because you're losing your benefits and you're gaining a little extra because wages are falling. Wages will continue to fall. What you have a basic income is you say that you will pay the standard rate of tax, 30%, 40%, whatever the middle class, the salariat are paying, from your first euro, okay? Not 80%. So that actually increases the incentive to labor. But the point I was trying to make before is that you need to move away from a system of welfare which only ties benefits to the performance of labor or the willingness to perform labor. I don't know if any of us in this room could be described as a couch potato. It's one of these typical middle-class myths to tell people that they are couch potatoes. I might be actually relaxing when you come and visit me and you ask inquisitive questions. I don't know whether you're lazy or not, and I don't wish to be moralistic in saying the fact that you're taking rest today means you're going to be a couch potato. We don't want the state to be making such judgments all the time. I don't know. You don't know. Why do we need to be so moralistic?
But why do we have to give millionaires a basic income if we also can increase the minimum wages to create the incentive to work, as Paul de Beer also argued? We all want to work in the end.
If we all want to work, then the whole line of questioning is irrelevant. I mean, I believe we do all want to work. We don't necessarily all want to labor. I don't want to work in a sewage or in a supermarket punching things, but I want to work. I never stop working. A lot of people do a lot of work that is not counted at the moment. And that's one of the biggest problems for the precariat at the moment. Now, your millionaire who comes back into the picture again, I've answered that one. He or she, and it's usually a he, should face a higher rate of tax, and the earnings that they gain should be going into capital funds to fund a movement towards a basic income.
So you're arguing for a progressive tax system?
Now, I'm actually arguing in the new book that we should set up sovereign wealth funds and have national capital funds where the rental income that is being increasingly earned by finance, by patent holders, by the monopolists of natural resources would go into a sovereign wealth fund like Norway established or like Alaska Permanent Fund, and from that a sort of social dividend would be paid out to everybody as a part of belonging to a society.
But not all countries have large gas supplies.
You don't need to base it on gas or oil or any particular things. Any high-tech industry that is yielding above average profits could have part of the profits put into a fund. There are different models that you could go for. But what we've got to realize in the 21st century is that we need a new system of distribution. Those minimum wages that you talk about are not working. Let's be honest. Real wages in our countries have been declining for 30 years, ever since the beginning of globalization. They will continue to decline until the wages in China and India and Indonesia rise to the levels of European wages. And just for the record, it ain't tomorrow.
But Mr. Standing, I hear you saying that we should force these companies, these high-tech companies, to add to society by giving in to a fund. But isn't this horrible for a competition position of a country? I can imagine if one country would do so, that all the high-tech development industries would move to another country.
No, because already 60 countries have capital funds. And those capital funds have not actually reduced the competitiveness of any of those 60, to my knowledge, including China. China has 3 national sovereign wealth funds. The fact that it's not governed democratically is what's wrong with it. But the actual existence of the fund has not had anything to do with erosion of competitiveness. Ditto with Norway. Every Norwegian today is actually a millionaire as a result of the Norwegian capital fund.
So does he deserve a basic income?
Well, I think you've got to approach it ethically. Let's leave it. Can I just use 1 minute to give a story? I apologize for doing this, but I was presenting my book in a town in Britain called Middlesbrough. Now, if anybody knows Middlesbrough, it was a tiny village in the 1820s. And then they suddenly discovered iron ore. And within 10 years, Middlesbrough became the center of the British Empire and the Industrial Revolution. So if you go to Sydney in Australia, that beautiful bridge is built in Middlesbrough. If you go to San Francisco, the Golden Bridge, it was built in Middlesbrough. If you go to India, all the railway system was built in Middlesbrough. Today, Middlesbrough people are impoverished, living in the precariat, living in weed-covered houses, and have no future. But down in the south of England, all the people who made their wealth from the workers in Middlesbrough go to Eton and are back into government in Britain. The ethical argument for a basic income is to say, look, you and I don't know who contributed to the wealth of your forebears, my forebears, or anybody else's forebears. But what we will say is that the contribution should yield a social dividend to everybody in society as an ethical justification for a return to everybody as equals.
All right, Mr. De Beer, let's speak about fairness furthermore. Can we say that our current system is based on supporting people who need social assistance and welfare assistance?
Well, at least it pretends to do it. And I think the basic idea is, of course, you provide support, either cash or service, to those people who are really in need. But at the same time, we also know that it doesn't function very well. There are indeed unmet needs. And I think, as Guy has clearly explained, a basic income might help in meeting those unmet needs. But at the same time, of course, you might reduce the one kind of error. The consequence is that you add, of course, the other kind of error, that's people who really do not need it will also get money. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a question of weighing those two errors that you make that should be decisive in determining whether introduction of basic income would be a good idea. And I have to say, in this time of austerity policies, of trying to cut expenditure on social protection, I'm not fully convinced that the choice for a basic income might be the wisest choice at this moment. Of course, if you would be able to make sure that more funds will be available to finance social protection measures, then I think it might be a very nice and good idea. Currently, my priorities would probably lay somewhere else.
Because then we come to another very important question, Mr. Stanning, how to pay for a basic income.
Well, in a sense, I've already answered that through capital funds, through a systematic strategy of abolishing the vast subsidies given to capital at the moment and to the middle classes in tax reliefs and tax credits and various other subsidies, EU, national, local. It's not realized to what an incredible extent governments give out subsidies to the rich.
But are you saying...
And wait. And to pay for a basic income, we need to set up capital funds, we need to abolish subsidies, and we need to shift resources. In answer to Paul's point about priorities, nothing is more conducive to the continuation of stagnation than the provision of these huge distorting subsidies to the rich and to capital, and imposing disincentives at the lower end of the labor market, so ordinary people don't have any incentives to be productive. Moving towards a system in which the basic income was one component, not a panacea, one component, would radically alter the economic arithmetic of the economic system.
Mr. De Beer, do you agree that our current system is not fair in such a way that rich people are often given huge subsidies?
Well, you can certainly say that the current system is not fair in the sense that income disparities have increased, and especially, of course, we know at the highest top income, the top 1%, who has increased their earnings and their net incomes over the past 20 years or so. Although for the large majority of the population, there is not a clear tendency, at least in the Netherlands, of increasing disparities. But mainly at the top, there is indeed, I think, something which is partly also stimulated by lowering top income tax rates and also indeed lowering tax rates on capital. So in that respect, I agree with him. Still, the question is, if you would like to make the system more just, more fair, whether at this moment the best way to do it would be introduce a basic income. Because in a situation of a developed country, a rich country like the Netherlands, I think a basic income will only have a substantial effect on the functioning of the whole system if it's indeed, I repeat, at subsistence level. So in the Netherlands, that would, in my view, mean it should be equal to the level of a social assistance benefit.
What would be that in euros?
Well,
speaking?
let's say for a single person, that would be something like, let's say, between 800 and 1,000 euros, something like that, I think. If it would be substantially lower, it would simply mean that we still would need all the elements of our current social protection system, simply because people cannot live by it. And then you would simply add one more layer to the existing, already quite complicated system of social security.
So a progressive tax system.
I think if you would really like to introduce in the Netherlands, it should be sufficient to abolish a large part of the existing system. And therefore you might also be able to remove poverty traps, to remove very high implicit tax rates for those people who move from benefit to work. But then, of course, it will also mean a huge overhaul of our complete system, because if indeed you would also give such a high basic income to all the population, then you would indeed need a completely different income tax system in order to make sure that you will not give a lot of money to people who really do not need it. So that's a very complicated operation. And my priority at this moment would be helping those people at the bottom of the income distribution who simply do not get sufficient benefits to have a decent living. That's my highest priority at the moment.
But the CPB, the Central Planning Bureau, we have a special bureau for this in the Netherlands, also calculated what the effect would be of giving everybody a basic income between 800 and 1,000 euros. And they said that the average tax percentage would be 64% on average. So that's also for the low incomes. Isn't this a huge disincentive to work?
Well, whether it's really 64%, that's something that you can discuss, I think, and it depends upon what exactly you assume what happens with the rest of the existing system of social protection. So I think you can also end up with a somewhat lower percentage if you abolish a large part of the existing social protection system. But again, 64% seems to be a very high percentage, But as a marginal tax rates, the current marginal tax rates for many people is substantially higher. And indeed, those people who are dependent on a social benefit and start working, they may face marginal tax rates in the order of 80%.
Yes, but that's marginal, not flat tax.
Yeah,
you
but
don't start.
Yeah, but the advantage of a flat tax system, if you would like to finance it in that way, of course, Guy pleads for a different kind of financing, but if you would finance it from a flat rate income tax, then the average tax is also the marginal tax. So the 64 average tax would simply be the marginal tax rate, and this is lower, and economists usually assume that the marginal tax rates is more important to understand the behavioral reactions of people than the average tax rate. So then the marginal tax rate will for many people be not higher than it is these days, and especially for those people who probably are most sensitive to marginal tax rates, and I think those are the people at the bottom, they will probably face lower marginal tax rates. So the incentives for those people to work will be probably stronger than they are nowadays.
Mr. Standing, you are the co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network. You believe in the Basic Income ID. Why don't you practice what you preach in the Basic Income Earth Network and give everyone within the network a basic income?
Well, that's a very nice idea. Sorry. That's a very nice idea. I'm sure there are a lot of members of Bien who would welcome my emptying my pockets. To believe in something, I mean, it's really a bad question because it's like saying in the football match that you disagree with the offside rule and therefore you're going to break it with impunity. I may wish to change the offside rule while I'm off the pitch, but while I'm on the pitch playing a game of football, I better obey the rules. I mean, to want to change is really what we're about. And since we formed Bien, I think we've seen some wonderful progress in unexpected places. I mean, when I first went to advocate a basic income in Brazil, I remember the politicians all laughing and saying, we can't have a basic income in Brazil, you're mad. And also bad. But now, over 60 million Brazilians are receiving, in effect, a monthly basic income called the Bolsa Escolar Familia. And it's rolling out. And now nobody questions it. When we started the experiment in India, the same feelings, the same reactions took place. What a stupid idea. It will not work. It'll cause people to be lazy. I'll tell you, go to those villages now and you'll see vast improvement in the amount of work people are doing and a transformation in their lives. So attitudes.
But this is in separate villages. It's not an entire country.
No, but you can roll it out from separate villages. Every experimental program has become a national program if they are successful. And we've got to realize and think about radically changing the type of society we're creating. It's a disgusting situation when more and more of the income are not going to the top 1%, it's the top 0.1%, if that. It's a revolting situation when we're turning millions of people into the precariat and subjecting them to sanctions and daily visits by assessors and monitors and social police and all that sort of apparatus. We're meant to be civilized societies. So let us think about making it more gentle, more convivial, and stimulating altruistic feelings and tolerant feelings. And that's what experiments by psychologists have shown comes with a basic income.
Our altruistic feelings have also brought us the welfare state as we know today. Also in times of the financial crisis, it is often argued that the welfare state has gone too far, has become a nanny state. How does this relate to paying for a basic income?
Well, partly, of course, you might say it is an alternative for welfare states which is not well functioning, because it's simple, unconditional, low administrative costs, etc. So perhaps it should be the alternative for the welfare state in the long run.
But a nanny state?
At the same time, I think the problem is that in those situations where there is not a decent system of social protection, like in India and Brazil, and partly in our society for people who are not covered by social security, like self-employed or the so-called ZZP'ers in the Netherlands, there I think a basic income will be very useful. And actually quite easy to introduce simply since there is nothing. For those countries or those part of the populations who are covered by the current welfare state, even though that system has a lot of disadvantages and should perhaps be reformed drastically, still it's very difficult to replace, I think, the existing system by something new like a basic income. And as I said before, you run the risk that you simply add a new component to the already quite complicated welfare system. And that would not be a good idea, I think. So I think it's quite difficult to envision who you could gradually move from the existing welfare system and the kind of social protection that we offer many people these days, even though protection might not be sufficient, but still it offers some kind of protection, replacing it by the basic income without running the risk for particular groups that they lose a lot of the current protection, for example, because they get a benefit which is higher than the basic income, is a quite complicated issue. And therefore, gradually I've come to the conclusion that it might be more easy to introduce a basic income scheme in indeed unlikely countries where we, 30 years ago, when the discussion about the basic income and PN started, we were hardly thinking about, that it might indeed be easier to introduce it in Brazil and India than it might be to introduce it in a country like the Netherlands.
We have a question from the audience.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. I have two questions, both to Mr. Guy Standing. The first is, Mr. De Beer has offered the comment that if there is a basic income, it should be at least equal to the subsistence level to not add additional layers of complexity. I've not heard a convincing response why a basic income lower than subsistence would also work. Then the second question is about feasibility. We've spoken a bit about feasibility if we were to have a flat tax system, but Mr. Guy Standing's approach would be to add capital funds, and to me that sounds very vague. Can you be more concrete about how you would finance such a costly policy?
Thank you.
I'll answer those things. Look, I believe strongly in having a full basic income that's actually higher than subsistence, right? I start from the practical political position that we have to build towards that long-term ideal. I've always believed that we have to go step by step because we're going to have to build a consensus to move in that direction. And I think a small basic income, sort of sometimes called a partial basic income rather than a full, still has the positive effects that we would want. We've seen that in these Indian pilots, we've seen it in Brazil, and we've seen it in various other respects, in Canada, in the United States, and various other experiments, where a partial basic income still has the positive effects, right? Now, when you say vague about capital funds, I'd like to invite you to go to Alaska. Alaska has the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is gradually built up so that every citizen, every legal resident of Alaska each year receives what is in effect a basic income paid out of the fund. The Norway is another model we have to build, but these aren't vague things, they are actual realities that are existing at the moment. So I think that we've got the mechanisms, we have to have the political will to fight for them, be it in the Netherlands, be it in Great Britain, or be it in Sweden, but we've got to fight for those. It's not vague.
Interesting to see that we have a whole discussion in the Netherlands concerning shale gas up in the north, in which we could actually fund our sovereign wealth fund, maybe even a basic income. We'll come to that later. We have another question from the audience.
Thank you. There's two concerns of me. First, one writer about basic income, Martin Ford, suggests that basic income should be a component which is guaranteed, and there might be social policy based on additional amounts of money. For instance, if you don't smoke, you get some more basic income, whatever. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Another thing which concerns me very personally is the concept of technological unemployment. Right now, America claims that it has an unemployment level of 9%, but the official statistics and analysis methods used in the 1970s suggest that it has an unemployment level well over 20%. What are your thoughts on that? is technological employment likely to increase in the next decades?
Interesting. So first, smoking, not smoking, grants me more basic income.
I'm the current, those of you who are in economics, you will realize the current sexy direction in social policy is called libertarian paternalism, the nudge nonsense. Basically the argument that you should encourage people to behave, quote unquote, in the right way. I think this is a very dangerous drift towards a panopticon state, towards directing people how to behave, much worse than any nanny state that the rights like to talk about. And it's very worrying because it's coming from the left of center and the right of center. This whole thing. I do not believe in making things conditional on whether you stop smoking or have sex or whatever you wish to do. I think this is all complete nonsense, and all of us should attack it and ridicule all such directions. Now, on the second question, which is a bane of all economists, and I can't see the person who asked the question. Sorry. A bane of all economists. I do not believe in the lump of labor fallacy, what the technological unemployment thing. What we've got, in fact, are more jobs now than at any time in human history. And yet, if I'm not mistaken, our technological development has far exceeded what it was ever in the past. It's not a shortage of jobs at the moment. In fact, there are too many of them with useless content. But it's actually the low pay and the bad working conditions and bad income associated with people in the precariat doing the sort of jobs that are available. And I think that we do suffer from a very high level of labor slack, so that the labor slack rate is probably 20% in most European countries. But it's actually a question of the distribution of income that's the real problem.
Let's look at what affects us all. The financial crisis since 2008 has also caused unemployment. Is it true what Mr. Standing is saying, that this unemployment which has been created after the financial crisis at the moment, 25% in Spain, is due to too exploitative jobs and wages? A poverty trap.
Well, I wouldn't say this is the cause of the high unemployment rates, but I think it would be, we have to dive in much deeper to explain why unemployment in Spain is so high while it's lower in Germany, etc. But the important point, I think, is you should make a distinction between structural developments and cyclical developments. Well, in respect of the structural developments, I agree with Guy Standing. I do not believe that as a consequence of robots, of technological progress, there will be too few jobs in the future. I think there will always be new needs, and if jobs are destroyed, then people are very creative and create new things they can do and also create new jobs. Of course, it's important that the institutions and the context supports the creation of new jobs. And to some respect, indeed, a basic income might help in doing that, simply because it will be simply much cheaper to create a new job. Simply because of the fact that someone already gets a basic income. So, in principle, all the discussions on minimum wages could be left aside if we have a decent basic income, simply because people do not need to earn that much money in order to have a decent living. And this might create a lot of new jobs, which are now not created, not because they're not productive, but because they're in our market economy, they do not give sufficient yields to make them productive.
So you're saying that
productive from a societal point of view.
So you're saying that a basic income should come with great market flexibility, labor market flexibility.
I think this has always been a difficult issue for advocates of a basic income. And this, of course, also explains why, on the one hand, someone like Milton Friedman was an advocate of a basic income or negative income tax, which is more or less the same, and also very left-wing people were in favoring of advocating a basic income. I think for the long term, an attractive view of a basic income is indeed the idea that you would have a basic income and abolish more or less everything else.
So no minimum wages, no
Indeed.
easy to fire
Yeah,
people.
perhaps even no employment protection legislation, etc. This might create in the long term a kind of ideal typical labor market, actually as the way that economists like to show, to present it in their textbooks, which is actually now completely unrealistic, but with a basic income it might become more realistic. But still the question is whether we will ever reach that long-term position in which such a perfect labor market could be functioning. And in the meantime, and again that's my problem with the introduction of a basic income, you might need a very long period of transition phase in which you gradually increase a partial basic income into a full basic income, and in that transitional phase you will need a lot of other kinds of regulations and protection systems, which will make it quite complicated. So I'm not so much convinced as Guy Stenning is that you will already see the positive effects of a basic income where you start with a relatively low partial basic income. Because then, as already mentioned, you simply add another element to the existing system.
Let Mr. Stenning respond to that. Can we implement a basic income by night?
I think we have to realize that we're talking about a moment of crisis in the global transformation. I really want to insist that the whole debate on basic income must be understood in the context of a Polanyian great transformation that is taking place. And what we've got is a situation where we have no basis of security for millions and millions of people who are entering the precariat. And what we've got to do is think of how to provide that security. I believe a basic income must be part of a package of progressive policies. And here we have a situation today where the old left, the Labour parties, the Social Democratic parties, ain't got a clue how to respond to the crisis. They haven't addressed the inequalities, the insecurities. They haven't got a clue. So I want to hear from those people if they have any better idea about addressing this vast problem of insecurity and inequalities. And so far I've been listening and I've heard one great sound. You got it. Silence.
We have a red shirt, sir, wearing a red shirt. Maybe you have a question or an idea how to solve this.
Well, I don't have an idea how to solve it, but I would like to have a Guy Standing elaborate on the more humanitarian and philosophical point of view, because we're mainly talking about economics, and I think economists are always fighting against each other and no one really wins. Or I think when we would like to have a basic income in our society, I think it would be better to have another approach to see the benefits for the people, not only financially but in.
So what's your question?
Well, if he would like to elaborate on that, what in India, what happened with the people? He said they were more, they would like to do more work. Well,
right.
they were more active and more happy, maybe, or.
Does this contribute to happiness? Is a good question.
I mean, the answer to the question, he's trying to get me to go back. Sorry.
Okay.
He's trying to get me to go back to the ethical thing. I think the ethical argument is the one that all of us should emphasize. I mean, all the practical things, whether it has this effect, that effect on little incentives, are important, but they're not the fundamental things. And I think philosophically, we can argue that a basic income would have a series of ethically desirable outcomes. It would have that social dividend effect that I mentioned earlier. It is the only policy that I've been able to find in terms of social protection policies which meet the 5 social justice principles I outline in this new book. Most fundamentally is not one of the left, it's one of a liberal kind, which is John Rawls's security difference principle. There is no other social policy that I know which satisfies that principle. And the principle is that a social policy is socially just only if it improves the security of the most insecure groups in society. And that is what a basic income would do. And the second social justice principle is that it would meet what I call the paternalism test principle. It's the only social policy that would not impose controls on some groups that are not imposed on the most free groups in society. Too many of these workfare experiments, the means testing, the behavior testing, impose controls on poor people, low-income people. But they don't impose them on the idle rich. They don't alter their incentive structures, etc. And the third justice principle is that it meets the rights not charity principle. In other words, it is a policy that would strengthen people's rights to make choices, how to live, how to participate in society, rather than strengthen the charity of bureaucrats who can make discretions. I don't like your face. You've been doing something. You've been sleeping with somebody. You've got slippers under your chair, but you don't get any benefits. All of those things. We should say F off. I don't know the Dutch equivalent, but you get my idea.
But sir, I hear you say that the most important task of social security should be to enhance this security. But I read that a basic income I get the idea that a basic income would actually lower the security of those most in need of security not being able to work, because the incentive will be lower. Isn't this the exact opposite of the idea that you want to achieve?
No, look, everybody would have a universal right to a basic income. Whether you're disabled, whether you're elderly, whether you're young, whether you're black, you're white, you're Christian, you're Muslim, everybody has that right. And no behavioral conditionality is put on it other than you continue to obey the law, which is equal for all, or should be. Therefore, it is actually a benefit that is given to everybody. And if you think about it for one tiny half second, you'll realize that the average income of a disabled person or an elderly person or a less educated person is going to be lower. And therefore it has a progressive content, because the basic income is a higher proportion of their income than it is for other groups in society. So in actual fact, it has a number of ethically pleasing results, including, most of all, which I haven't mentioned, giving people a greater sense of control over their time, which is one of the key assets of society.
What about this fundamental difference? Is this not a fundamental difference about a basic income talking about a right to a good life, and the system we have today arguing for the right to pursue a good life?
I don't know the difference, but he may.
Well, I don't know whether we're really going to answer your question, but I would like to add something about the ethical question. I've been doing now research on social solidarity for quite a long time. And what each time strikes me, if we do, for example, experiments or surveys, etc., each time it turns out that the idea of reciprocity is very important and why people are willing to act solidarily towards other people. So the idea that you do not only give to someone else, but you can expect something in return, not immediately, not necessarily the same amount, but something should be done in return to what you do. This seems to be one of the most fundamental reasons why people are willing to support, for example, the system of social security, social protection. And of course, it might be that if you introduce a basic income, this condition is still fulfilled, because probably many people who get a basic income will be willing to do something in return. Will do either voluntary work or accept a job and pay taxes, etc. But nevertheless, reciprocity is not part of the system as such. And this might be a problem. And therefore, I think it will be very difficult to get sufficient public support for the idea of a basic income, because the initial reaction of many people is, oh, it simply means that you give money without any condition. People do not need to do anything in return, and therefore many people will be lazy, etc. Even if this is not true, I think this is a quite strong belief among the population, and therefore I think such an unconditional system will be very difficult to introduce. Even though you might give some other ethical reasons why it might be a very good idea, I'm certainly afraid that at this moment you will never get sufficient public support, because people so strongly stress the need of some kind of reciprocity, which is a real and explicit component of the whole system.
So maybe then we have an answer why we should give the millionaire a basic income. We have a question from the audience.
Yeah, I have a question. I think the ethical and philosophical discussion is wonderful, but I think we're not here to dream. I think we're here to come up with a solution to real problems in a realistic way. And I see a problem. And my problem is that if the basic income is less than the subsistence wage, then we still have these layers of complexity, which we cannot remove, which means that we hurt affordability, and we do have incentives. Right? So if basic income is lower than subsistence, we get incentives, but we have problems with affordability. Now suppose the opposite. What if the basic income is more than subsistence? Then we don't have the complexity, which means it might be affordable in that way, but we lose incentives. I think we shouldn't underestimate, in some sense, the individual rationalism of people. If I were, given money every month, I didn't have to do anything for it, it was enough to live by, I might consider doing very, very little. And that makes me honest, I hope. And I think we shouldn't underestimate how many more people are around that may be like that. So there's a problem here, even if it's lower than subsistence or more.
So I think you want to address this shortly?
Yeah. I think...
Microphone?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, if it's less than subsistence, you still strengthen the bargaining position of the person. If you're getting something, whereas you weren't getting something before, and you're getting it as a right, then you can say to an employer or anybody who's really exploiting you and oppressing you, get lost. Because you've got a stronger position to bargain from, all right? It actually gives you an incentive, which you don't get with means tested. We've been through that one. So that argument is not overcome by what you just said. But there's also the argument that supposing you raised the basic income to some notion of subsistence, 99% of people actually want to improve their life well above subsistence. They want to improve the lives of their children or their families and their friends and their neighbors. And so they are going to want to do labor to gain an income. But now, if you're paying a subsistence in a basic income, you've got a stronger bargaining position, and you can say to a potential employer, let's do a bargain. You pay me what I'm worth and I'll work for you. You'll push the wages up. That's great. Some jobs may disappear because the person is not prepared to pay for them. The value of the jobs are so low in social terms. That's great. We need to automate many of these lousy jobs. But in the other respects, you are increasing the incentives to be efficient. It's called dynamic efficiency. If you get a stronger bargaining, you push up the wage rate, firms become more inclined to be efficient because they're not getting cheap labor anymore. They're getting people who are prepared to bargain. That's a good dynamic because you're promoting growth, you're promoting development. So your skepticism from the right is not justified by the behavioral dynamics. But I just want to end with the other thing. Psychologists have done experiments in rich countries, the United States, Canada, Poland, the UK, Australia, where they've said when people provided with a basic income, they become more altruistic. They're more tolerant, which is a rather important value in European societies at the moment, and they are more productive in the way they work. their productivity increases in the work that they do. And all of these things have economic and social benefits that flow from giving people basic security. What is wrong with wanting everybody to have basic security? I want basic security. Is there anyone in this room who doesn't?
So the basic income gives us greater economic security, which leads to a better bargaining position and therefore better production of workers. All right, I see we will take one last question.
Well, thank you for your story. I do have a question though. I'm really interested why both of you actually do not believe that that technological progress will lead to the destruction of jobs. Because a recent study from the University of Oxford has shown that 47% of jobs runs a high risk of being automated in the next 20 years. Where do you think those new jobs come from us? And is this actually not an argument in favor of the basic income? Because, well, of course, if the basic income is a dividend of progress, then higher progress should lead to the basic income, right? Why do you oppose this idea that the technological progress will destroy jobs?
Interesting.
Okay, so,
Mr. De Beer.
Well, I do not doubt that technological progress will destroy many jobs. It always has been doing that. Look at 100 years ago. Most of the jobs that existed then do not exist anymore. Even the occupations have completely vanished. But 100 years ago, no one was able to predict what kind of new jobs would be created. All the new jobs related to modern technology, everything which is related to the internet, for example, was unimaginable 100 years ago. So it's quite easy to show that many jobs will disappear. And if you only look at the jobs that will disappear, then you will indeed fear that there will be too few jobs in the future. It's simply much more difficult to predict what kind of new jobs will be created. But as history shows, there always have been created new jobs simply because technology afforded us to create new activities and to create new products, create new services for which there was demand, and that demand created new jobs. So I do not see any reason why what happened in the past could not also happen in the future. Of course, I agree with you. If it would be true, this would be an extra argument in favor of a basic income. But you should not invent an argument because it's favoring the thing that you would like to favor. I think you should use real arguments. And I don't think this is a strong argument in favor of a basic income.
Mr. Standing, let's look at our historical timeline. The basic income is never implemented as we argue now. Why not? And is this not too drastic of an idea to implement in the democracy we have?
Let me combine the answer I wanted to give to your question. There's no doubt about it that we're going through a technological revolution, some sort of Kondratiev long wave, which has really been engulfing the world. This has disruptive effects, but I totally agree with Paul. In the long term, new jobs and new types of work and labor take place. Now, what we're experiencing at the moment is the painful construction of a global labor market. So where those new jobs will be placed is up for real tensions. And the type of new jobs and the type of new labor, which comes to the other question, is equally important. The biggest growth area at the moment in labor markets is called crowd work, crowd labor, where virtually, and I'm very pleased to be in Amsterdam to say this next remark, you have online a Dutch auction taking place all over the world, where people are providers, multi-million-dollar companies, middlemen, are putting out jobs online for a Dutch auction. So whoever bids lowest at the end of the week gets those jobs broken down into tasks. So you might be competing with a woman in Accra for a particular labor. Now, this type of new situation has a fundamental implication for any feasible design of your social protection system. You can't have a social insurance old welfare state model with this sort of labor market taking place. And the disruptive effects of technology, where we can outsource, we can insource, we can divide up, is of changing the nature of uncertainty and insecurity that people in the precariat are facing. We want to overcome that. And that is why a basic income as a right is the only way to give people security in this sort of flexible global system that's emerging.
But is it then a basic income that should be provided throughout the world in every country?
We can only be doing it within our own countries. I mean, I might, in my, who was it who wanted to dream, said it's all very nice as a dream. Well, we should all dream, for heaven's sake. I mean, let's not get old and fogey. We should dream, but let's be realistic at the same time. I mean, we are going to make progress in this direction slowly. I've seen this. We know that. We're not pie in the sky. It's a question of having a political will and strategy, and political parties and political movements that are committed to going in a certain direction. And that direction should be about giving us as civilized human beings security, control of our time, the capacity to be altruistic and tolerant. And that is what the whole debate should be, what it is about.
Will my children have a basic income?
Yes.
That sounds great.
Thank you very much for today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening today. We had a very interesting discussion, and we'd like to invite you for next week. We have a session with room for discussion with Chris Zook, who works for Bain Company, and as a strategy consultant has written many books, and is also known as the director for the American Chamber of Commerce in the Netherlands. We hope to see you there next week on Tuesday. For now, once again, a warm applause. Thank you, Paul de Beer and Guy Standing.